For 5 years, Frank Miller had been a fixture at First National Bank of Springfield, standing quietly by the main entrance in his navy blue security uniform, offering polite greetings to customers and maintaining the kind of watchful presence that made people feel safe, without feeling observed. At 77, he moved with the deliberate care of someone his age. But there was something about his posture, the way he positioned himself to see both the street and the interior, the way his eyes tracked movement without seeming to stare, that suggested experience beyond routine security work. Most customers assumed he was a retired police officer, perhaps former military. But Frank never volunteered details about his background. Until Tuesday morning, October 8, 2013, when two armed men burst through the bank's glass doors expecting to encounter an easy target, and instead found themselves facing someone whose combat training had been forged on the beaches of Normandy 70 years earlier. What happened in the next 90 seconds would reveal that the quiet security guard's calm demeanor wasn't just temperament. It was the product of military discipline learned under fire, where staying cool meant staying alive. Welcome to Forgotten Hero Stories. Before we continue this intense story of training, instinct, and the moment when a D-Day veteran's military skills saved innocent lives, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like Frank's deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button. These voices matter, and your support helps us honor the greatest generation. First National Bank of Springfield occupied a corner building on Main Street that had been serving the community since 1952. The interior maintained the classic feel of small-town banking, polished marble floors, wooden teller windows, and the kind of atmosphere that made customers feel they were dealing with neighbors rather than a faceless corporation. Frank Miller had started working there in 2008, 5 years after retiring from his job at the grocery store. Bank manager Sarah Chen had hired him not just for his reliability, but for something intangible she'd noticed during his interview. A calm alertness that seemed to come from deeper experience than the typical security applicant possessed. "I need someone who can make customers feel safe without making them feel like they're entering a fortress," Sarah had explained during his interview. "Someone who can be friendly, but also observant." Frank had nodded, understanding. "I can do that, Miss Chen. I've had experience watching for trouble while keeping things looking normal." His duties were straightforward: read customers, monitor the entrance, ensure compliance with security protocols, and maintain a visible presence that would deter potential problems. The bank had modern security systems, cameras, alarms, reinforced glass, but Sarah understood that nothing replaced human observation and judgment. Frank took the job seriously, but approached it with characteristic modesty. He arrived 15 minutes early each morning, checked the building's perimeter, and positioned himself where he could see both the street outside and the banking floor inside. He learned the names of regular customers, noticed unusual behavior patterns, and maintained the kind of situational awareness that came so naturally he rarely thought about it consciously. Customers found him reassuring without being intimidating. He'd hold doors for elderly patrons, offer directions to newcomers, and provide a steady, calming presence during the inevitable frustrations of banking business. Children weren't afraid of him, and teenagers didn't feel targeted by his attention. But observant staff members noticed details about Frank's behavior that seemed unusual for a typical security guard. He never sat down during his shift, even during slow periods. He positioned himself so his back was never to the main entrance. His eyes constantly scanned the parking lot and street, not with obvious vigilance, but with the automatic awareness of someone monitoring his environment. Tuesday, October 8, 2013 began like any other at First National Bank. Frank arrived at 8:45 a.m. for his 9 o'clock shift, conducted his usual exterior walk-around, and positioned himself near the entrance as the first customers of the day began arriving. The morning rush was typical for a Tuesday: retirees conducting weekly banking, small business owners making deposits, young parents handling errands before work. Frank greeted each customer with his customary "good morning" and gentle nod, mentally cataloging familiar faces and noting anything unusual about newcomers. Sarah Chen was at her desk reviewing loan applications. Teller supervisor Maria Rodriguez was helping train a new employee. The 3 customer service representatives were handling account questions with their usual efficiency. It was the kind of quiet, productive morning that characterized small-town banking. At 10:23 a.m., Frank noticed a dark sedan pull up across the street from the bank's main entrance. Two men sat in the front seats, and while Frank couldn't see their faces clearly, something about their body language caught his attention. They weren't conducting business, they were watching. Frank's training kicked in automatically. Though he gave no outward sign of increased alertness, he shifted position slightly to get a better view of the vehicle, while maintaining his normal greeting routine with entering customers. The sedan's occupants appeared to be studying the bank's layout, timing the flow of customers, observing the security setup. After about 5 minutes, the sedan pulled away, but Frank made mental notes. Dark blue, four-door, possibly a Honda Accord. Two male occupants. No front license plate visible from his angle. He considered reporting the observation to Sarah, but surveillance alone wasn't necessarily criminal. Still, his instincts, developed over years of watching for danger, told him to stay alert. 20 minutes later, Frank saw the same sedan return, this time parking in the lot of the closed gas station next door. Again, the occupants appeared to be watching the bank. This time, Frank walked casually to Sarah's office. "Mrs. Chen," he said quietly, "I wanted to let you know I've observed a vehicle conducting what appears to be surveillance. Might be nothing, but I thought you should be aware." Sarah looked up from her computer. "Surveillance?" "Dark sedan, two occupants, been watching our building for about 25 minutes total. Could be waiting for someone, could be planning something. I'm going to keep an eye on it." Sarah trusted Frank's judgment. In 5 years, he'd never raised a false alarm, but he'd also prevented 3 minor incidents through early intervention. "Should we call the police?" "Not yet," Frank replied, "but I'd suggest alerting the staff to be extra observant, and maybe consider activating the silent alarm system so it's ready if needed." Sarah nodded, grateful for Frank's calm professionalism. She sent a discreet message to the teller supervisor. "Security alert. Follow all protocols. Normal operations." At 10:52 a.m., the sedan's doors opened, and Frank Miller prepared for something he'd hoped never to face again. Frank watched as two men emerged from the sedan with movements that immediately confirmed his worst suspicions. They moved with nervous energy, constantly checking their surroundings, and their clothing was deliberately nondescript, but bulky in ways that suggested concealed weapons. The men approached the bank's entrance from different angles, a basic tactical maneuver designed to create confusion and prevent coordinated resistance. Frank recognized the pattern from military training. Divide the defender's attention, control multiple entry points, establish dominance through overwhelming force. Frank's mind shifted into a mode of thinking that hadn't been necessary for 70 years, but which returned with crystalline clarity. Assess the threat. Identify the objectives. Determine the response. Protect the innocent. He could see now that both men carried pistols poorly concealed under their jackets. Their ages appeared to be mid-20s. Their demeanor suggested desperation rather than professional planning, and their approach lacked the coordination of experienced criminals. This meant they were dangerous because they were unpredictable, but it also meant they could be outmaneuvered by someone with superior training and experience. Frank positioned himself slightly behind the entrance door, not hiding, but placing himself where he could observe both men as they entered while keeping himself out of their immediate line of sight. His hand moved instinctively to his radio, but he didn't call for help yet. Premature escalation could trigger violence unnecessarily. At 10:54 a.m., the first man pushed through the glass doors with his weapon drawn, shouting, "Everyone on the ground, this is a robbery." His partner followed 3 seconds later, moving toward the teller line while the first man attempted to control the lobby area. Frank's 77-year-old body responded with reflexes trained on Omaha Beach. Instead of panic, he felt the familiar calm that had kept him alive during artillery bombardments and machine gun fire. Time seemed to slow, his vision sharpened, and his mind began calculating angles. distances, and tactical options with the precision of someone who had faced far more dangerous enemies than two nervous bank robbers. The customers in the lobby, an elderly woman, a young mother with her infant, and a businessman conducting a transaction, responded with predictable terror, dropping to the floor and covering their heads. The tellers froze behind their windows, looking to Maria Rodriguez for guidance. But Frank Miller didn't drop to the floor. Instead, he began moving with the quiet precision of someone who understood exactly what needed to be done. Frank's assessment of the situation took less than 5 seconds. 2 armed subjects, approximately 6 civilian hostages, confined space with limited exits, subjects showing signs of extreme nervousness, suggesting hair-trigger responses. The tactical solution was clear. Neutralize the threat quickly before panic led to violence. The first robber was focused on the civilians on the floor, shouting commands and waving his weapon in a way that showed minimal firearms training. The second robber was at the teller windows demanding money while constantly looking over his shoulder toward his partner. Neither had noticed Frank's position behind the entrance door. Frank moved with the silent efficiency he learned in house-to-house fighting through French villages. His age slowed his physical speed, but his tactical thinking was as sharp as it had been at 20. He approached the first robber from behind and to the side, staying in the man's blind spot while closing distance. "Money in the bag! Now!" the first robber was screaming at the tellers, his voice cracking with stress. The second robber, near the teller windows, was fumbling with a canvas bag and pointing his weapon at Maria Rodriguez. "Hurry up, all of it!" Frank reached the first robber in 4 silent steps. Using a technique learned in close-quarters combat training, he struck the man's wrist with precise force, causing the gun to fall to the marble floor. Before the robber could react, Frank had him in a control hold that immobilized his arm while keeping Frank positioned behind him as a shield. "Drop your weapon," Frank called to the second robber, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed under pressure. "Your partner is secure. This doesn't have to get worse." The second robber spun around, pointing his gun toward Frank and the first robber. "Let him go, old man, or You'll what?" Frank interrupted, his tone calm but steel hard. "Shoot through your friend to get to me? Think about what you're doing, son. Think about whether you want to be charged with armed robbery or murder." Frank's military training had taught him that most people, even criminals, could be talked down if approached correctly. The key was projecting calm authority while giving them a face-saving way to surrender. The second robber's hands were shaking, and Frank could see the wild look in his eyes that meant he was close to panic. This was the most dangerous moment, when desperation could overcome rationality. "Listen to me carefully," Frank continued, his voice taking on the tone he'd used to calm terrified soldiers under fire. "You came here for money, not to hurt anyone. The money isn't worth spending your life in prison. Put the gun down and we'll work this out." The bank lobby was frozen in a tableau that balanced on the edge of violence. Frank held the first robber in a control position that kept the man immobilized but unharmed. The second robber stood 10 feet away with his weapon pointed in Frank's direction, but visibly struggling with indecision. Frank could hear the subtle sounds that told him help was already on the way. Maria Rodriguez had activated the silent alarm, and police sirens were audible in the distance. But sirens could also trigger panic in unstable subjects, making the next few seconds critical. "What's your name, son?" Frank asked the second robber, his voice remaining steady and conversational. The question caught the young man off guard. "What?" "Your name. You're about to make the most important decision of your life. I'd like to know who I'm talking to." "Danny," the robber said automatically, then looked angry at himself for answering. "Danny, I'm Frank. I've been in situations like this before, and I want to help you make the right choice here. Can you hear those sirens?" Danny nodded, his weapon hand trembling more visibly. "That means we have maybe 2 minutes before this becomes a hostage situation, with SWAT teams and helicopters. Once that happens, your options become very limited. But right now, you can still walk out of here alive and unharmed." Frank could see the internal struggle playing out on Danny's face. The young man was realizing that the simple robbery had become something far more complex and dangerous than he'd anticipated. "I can't go to prison," Danny said, his voice breaking. "I can't." "You're not going to prison if nobody gets hurt," Frank replied firmly. "First-time offense, nobody injured, you cooperate with police. That's probation, community service, maybe a short sentence in county jail. But if someone gets hurt now, that's 25 to life. Don't throw your life away for a bad decision you made 20 minutes ago." Frank's partner in the control hold had stopped struggling and was listening to the conversation with growing awareness that resistance was futile. Frank could feel the tension going out of the man's body as reality set in. "Your friend here is already thinking smart," Frank observed. "He knows this is over. The question is whether it ends with everyone safe, or whether it becomes something nobody can take back." The police sirens were getting closer. Danny looked toward the door, then back at Frank, then at the civilians on the floor who were watching with terrified attention. Frank made his final appeal. "Danny, I'm 77 years old. I've seen real war, real violence, real consequences. Take it from someone who knows. The brave thing here is putting that gun down. Don't let the next 5 minutes destroy the rest of your life." Danny stared at Frank for a long moment, seeing something in the old man's eyes that conveyed absolute sincerity and hard-earned wisdom. Slowly, carefully, he lowered his weapon and set it on the floor. "Smart choice," Frank said quietly. "Now step back and put your hands behind your head." Police officers burst through the bank's entrance 90 seconds later to find a scene under complete control. 2 suspects were secured and compliant. No shots had been fired, and no one was injured. The civilians were shaken but safe, and Frank Miller stood calmly near the entrance, ready to provide a detailed report. Lieutenant Jim Harrison, the first supervisor on scene, surveyed the situation with amazement. In 23 years of police work, he'd never arrived at an armed robbery to find everything resolved without violence. "Who secured the suspects?" Harrison asked. Sarah Chen pointed to Frank. "Our security guard, Frank Miller." Harrison approached Frank with expressions of professional curiosity and growing respect. "Mr. Miller, can you walk me through what happened here?" Frank provided a concise, accurate, tactical report. Subject positions, weapons status, sequence of events, de-escalation techniques employed. His description was so precise and professional that Harrison found himself taking notes as if he were debriefing a fellow officer. "Mr. Miller," Harrison said when Frank finished, "where did you learn those control techniques? That de-escalation training?" Frank was quiet for a moment, then answered simply, "United States Army, 1943 to 1946. Some things you don't forget." Harrison's eyebrows rose. "Military police?" "Infantry, Normandy, then across Europe. You learn to handle dangerous situations when your life depends on staying calm." The paramedics checked Frank for injuries, despite his protests that he was fine. The suspects, Danny Morrison, 23, and his partner, Kevin Walls, 25, were arrested without incident and later charged with armed robbery. Both would eventually plead guilty and receive sentences that reflected their cooperation and the fact that no one had been harmed. But it was Frank's handling of the situation that became the focus of attention. Local news crews arrived to find a story more remarkable than a simple robbery. A World War II veteran whose quick thinking and military training had prevented what could have been a tragedy. "Mr. Miller," a reporter asked, "how do you feel about being called a hero?" Frank's response was characteristic. "I just did my job, same as I learned to do in 1944. Assess the situation, stay calm, do what needs to be done to protect people." "But you're 77 years old. Weren't you afraid?" Frank smiled slightly. "When you've been shot at by German machine guns, two nervous bank robbers don't seem quite as scary. The story of Frank Miller's actions at First National Bank spread quickly through Springfield and then beyond. Local television news picked up the story, then regional networks, and finally national outlets, fascinated by the image of a World War II veteran using 7-decade-old combat training to stop modern criminals. But Frank's response to the attention was predictably modest. When asked to appear on morning talk shows, he declined. When offered interviews with military magazines, he politely refused. When the mayor wanted to give him the key to the city, Frank suggested the recognition would be better directed toward active duty service members. "I appreciate the kind words," Frank told Sarah Chen when she asked if he was comfortable with the media attention. "But I didn't do anything special. I just used training that every soldier from my generation received." Sarah, who had witnessed the entire incident, disagreed strongly. "Frank, what you did was extraordinary. You kept everyone safe, prevented violence, and handled a crisis that could have ended tragically. That's not just training, that's character." The most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Danny Morrison, the young robber whose life Frank had potentially saved by talking him down from violence. 2 weeks after the incident, Morrison sent a letter to Frank through the bank. In it, he wrote, "Mr. Miller, I wanted to thank you for treating me like a human being instead of just a criminal. You could have hurt me, but you chose to help me instead. I've been thinking about what you said about consequences and choices. I'm using my time in jail to get my life straight. I wanted you to know that what you did mattered." Frank kept the letter but didn't share it publicly. When Sarah asked about it, he simply said, "Sometimes the most important part of stopping someone isn't the stopping, it's what happens afterward." The incident did lead to one significant change in Frank's routine. First National Bank's corporate office decided to upgrade their security protocols based on Frank's recommendations. His after-action report, written with military precision, identified vulnerabilities and suggested improvements that were implemented system-wide. "We realized," Sarah explained to the bank's board of directors, "that we hadn't just hired a security guard, we'd hired a consultant with real-world experience in crisis management." In the weeks following the robbery attempt, Frank found himself fielding questions from other security professionals, police officers, and military veterans who wanted to understand his approach to the situation. Rather than seeking attention, Frank used these conversations as teaching opportunities. "The most important thing," he would tell people, "is that violence should always be the last option, not the first. Too many people think security work is about being tough or intimidating. Real security is about preventing problems before they escalate." A group of young police officers asked Frank to speak at their monthly training meeting. His presentation focused on de-escalation techniques and the importance of reading people's emotional states during crisis situations. "Those boys weren't hardened criminals," Frank explained to the officers. "They were scared kids who'd made a bad decision and didn't know how to get out of it. If I'd treated them like dangerous enemies, they might have acted like dangerous enemies. Instead, I treated them like people who needed help making better choices." The officers were particularly interested in Frank's use of tactical positioning during the incident. "You have to understand," Frank said, "that everything I did came from training I received 70 years ago. The principles haven't changed. Control space, minimize risk to innocence, maintain situational awareness, and always have a plan for what happens next." One young officer asked, "Mr. Miller, weren't you concerned about your age and physical limitations?" Frank's answer surprised them. "Age taught me something that young soldiers don't always understand, that the most powerful weapon you have is between your ears. Physical confrontation should be your last resort, because your brain can usually find a better solution." The conversation that followed led to Frank being invited to speak at the police academy about crisis psychology and civilian protection. His presentations, delivered with characteristic humility and practical wisdom, became part of the standard curriculum. After 6 weeks of media attention and speaking engagements, Frank Miller returned to his normal routine at First National Bank. He resumed his position by the entrance, greeting customers with his customary politeness, and maintaining the same watchful presence that had characterized his 5 years of service. But something had changed in how people saw him. Customers who had barely noticed him before now stopped to chat, to thank him, or simply to acknowledge his presence with new respect. Children were fascinated by the hero guard, and parents would point him out as an example of courage and service. Frank handled the attention with good humor, but always deflected praise back to the importance of community safety and looking out for each other. "Mr. Frank," 6-year-old Emma Rodriguez asked him one morning, "are you really a hero?" Frank knelt down to her level and answered, with the same honesty he brought to everything else, "I'm just someone who learned a long time ago that when people need help, you help them. You can be a hero too by being kind to people and standing up for what's right." The bank's atmosphere had also changed subtly. Staff members felt more secure, knowing that their security guard wasn't just a friendly presence, but someone with proven ability to handle real danger. Customers expressed confidence in the bank's safety measures, and several new accounts were opened by people who specifically mentioned Frank's actions as a factor in their decision. Sarah Chin reflected on the impact during Frank's annual performance review. "In 5 years, you've never missed a day, never had a complaint, and prevented multiple incidents through early intervention. But more than that, you've made our bank a place where people feel genuinely safe and welcome." Frank's response was typical. "That's the job, Mrs. Chen. Make people feel safe, keep problems from starting, and handle whatever comes up. Same as any security work." "No," Sarah replied. "It's not the same as any security work. What you do requires judgment, experience, and character that can't be taught. It has to be earned." Frank Miller continued working security at First National Bank until his retirement at age 82. During his final 7 years of service, the bank experienced no security incidents more serious than an occasional dispute over account fees or a locked-out customer seeking help. When Frank announced his retirement, Sarah Chen realized that replacing him would be impossible. His combination of military training, life experience, and personal character had created a security presence that went far beyond the typical guard position. The retirement party held in the bank's community room was attended by customers, staff, local police officers, and city officials, who had all been touched by Frank's example. But the most meaningful tribute came from Danny Morrison, the former robber who had turned his life around during his 18-month sentence. Morrison, now working as a counselor for at-risk youth, spoke about the lesson Frank had taught him. "Mr. Miller showed me that how you treat people in their worst moment can change their entire life. He could have hurt me, arrested me, treated me like garbage. Instead, he talked to me like I was worth saving. That made all the difference." Frank's response to the tributes was characteristically humble. "I was fortunate to work in a place where I could be useful. That's all any of us can ask for, the chance to make a positive difference in our community." The legacy of Frank's service extended beyond the bank itself. His example influenced security protocols at businesses throughout Springfield, emphasizing de-escalation training and community-oriented approaches to public safety. The police department incorporated his insights into their officer training, and local veterans organizations used his story to illustrate the ongoing value of military experience in civilian service. But perhaps the most important legacy was the reminder that heroism often comes in unexpected forms, carried by ordinary people doing extraordinary things when circumstances demand it. Frank Miller had spent 5 years as a quiet security guard, largely unnoticed by the community he protected. In 90 seconds, he revealed that the most effective guardians are often those who hope never to need their most serious skills. The plaque installed near the bank's entrance after Frank's retirement reads simply, "In recognition of Frank Miller, whose service to this community exemplified the highest ideals of duty, courage, and protection of others." But those who knew Frank understood that he would have preferred no recognition at all, just the satisfaction of having done his job when it mattered most. The heroes of the greatest generation didn't hang up their uniforms and forget their training when World War II ended. They carried their skills, their discipline, and their sense of duty into civilian careers where they continued to serve their communities in ways both visible and invisible. Frank Miller's story reminds us that the elderly security guard, the veteran working at the hardware store, or the retired soldier helping at the community center might possess training and experience that could save lives in moments of crisis. They don't wear their military background as a badge of honor. They carry it as a responsibility to protect and serve wherever they find themselves. This story is also about recognition, understanding that the people who keep our communities safe often do so quietly, without fanfare, drawing on experiences and training we might never know they possess. Frank Miller worked for 5 years as a security guard before anyone realized he was a combat veteran whose skills had been tested under the most extreme conditions imaginable. How many other Frank Millers work in our banks, our schools, our stores, and our neighborhoods? How many quiet guardians use military training, police experience, or other specialized skills to keep us safe without ever asking for recognition or appreciation? The next time you see a security guard, a crossing guard, or any other person whose job involves protecting others, take a moment to recognize that they might be carrying more responsibility and more capability than you realize. Their calm presence might be the product of training earned under fire, experience gained in situations most of us will never face. Share in the comments. Have you ever witnessed someone's military or emergency training surface in a civilian crisis? Have you been surprised to learn about someone's background when they stepped up in a moment of need? Let this be a place where we honor the quiet guardians who keep our communities safe. Subscribe to Forgotten Heroes Stories if you believe that service comes in many forms, and that the most effective protectors are often those who hope never to need their most serious skills. Hit that notification bell so you never miss the stories that remind us to appreciate the people who stand between us and danger. Tomorrow, we'll share another story of hidden training and quiet courage. Until then, remember, the person keeping you safe might have learned their skills in places and times that tested the limits of human courage. And they bring that experience to bear every day in service to their community. Thank you for listening. Thank you for recognizing.
And thank you for understanding that true guardians don't seek glory, they seek only the opportunity to keep others safe.